What is going on, everyone? Nostalgia925 coming at you with another exciting explaining Digimon episode. But first of all, let me start by saying sorry for my delay in producing content. I did make a separate post in the community page to explain what has been going on, and your comments have been more than encouraging. They were inspiring. Lots of our plans have been cancelled or stalled because of this pandemic, so it really is a bit depressing, but knowing that we're all in it together does give me lots of relief, for which I'm thanking each and every single one of you. In this video we are going to be discussing Paildramon and Dynobimon. The former is the more known variant, but that does not mean that the latter is less interesting. That is why I'll do my very best to make you curious and sort of poke your mind when it comes to these Digimon. Let me briefly divide the video first into a few segments, that way it is going to be easier for you to absorb the information, and it's going to be easier for me to explain these two Digimon. We'll start by explaining Exvimon and Stingmon. The fusion is either responsible for the creation of Paildramon or Dynobimon. That is why it is good to put them into perspective, as we would already know what they are all about and maybe figure out which trait was passed on to both fusions. After briefly discussing Stingmon and Exvimon, we're going to discuss Paildramon and Dynobimon to better know how they differ from each other. Thirdly, and this one is going to be very important, we are going to theorize about how we have a Paildramon and a Dynobimon. After all, they are basically the same Digimon as both exist thanks to the combination of a Stingmon and an Exvimon. What could be the cause of them fusing either into one or the other? With your comments, we are going to make sure to have a better image. To finish, I'll reply to a quote-unquote unrelated comment. A very interesting comment, worth discussing, despite it being of another subject. You'll see once you reach the end of the video. Now that you have that out of the way, let us get right into it. Paildramon and Dynobimon are both fusions. Exvimon fusing with Stingmon would make either one of them. What we'll do is quickly take a look at both Exvimon and Stingmon. We'll start with the former. Exvimon, who we discussed in the Explaining Vmon Digivolution line video, is a mythical dragon. It is a variant species of Vidramon, also a mythical dragon Digimon whose existence is said to be extremely precious. Reason why we have an Exvimon is because this Digimon is a pure breed of Vidramon, meaning that it is a cultivated variety achieved through the process of selective breeding. Who was responsible for this selective breeding is a mystery, but what you need to know about selective breeding is that it is a process by which someone, in Digimon's case I would say something maybe, used animal breeding or plant breeding to selectively develop particular phenotypic traits or characteristics. A phenotypic trait is that which can be observed. Think of the hairs of someone or the eye shape. And you see, dragons are usually depicted with wings, right? Think of the dragons in the Game of Thrones or the legendary dragons in Yu-Gi-Oh! All of them have wings. However, Vidramon, despite being a dragon, does not have wings. These presumably only manifested after the selective breeding that created the Exvimon variant. This should explain why Exvimon, to my opinion, looks a bit more like a dragon, well, a humanoid dragon that is, and why Vidramon looks more like a dinosaur. The dragon traits only ever emerged after specific Vidramon were brought together. Now, obviously when it comes to breeding in the Digimon universe, that is another mystery, which I explained in the Digimon gender episode. You can find the link to it in the description box. To finish, when it comes to Exvimon's personality, it does have a strong sense of justice, but will show restraint when it comes to unleashing its destructive power. And I think that it is important that we take its personality into account to see how it's going to be passed on to the other fusion. Exvimon's colleague to become either Paildramon or Dynobimon would be Stingmon, Digimon I explained in the Explaining Warmon Digivolution line video. Stingmon is an insectoid Digimon with a humanoid body structure. Its entire body is covered in a green and grey exoskeleton, which is common among insectoid Digimon. In comparison to Exvimon, I would say that Stingmon is the most composed Digimon. It has abilities resembling that of an assassin, aiming mostly at the opponent's vitals by accurately and keenly discerning the way they carry their body. A highly intelligent Digimon and the owner of a cool disposition. So I would say that when it comes to its personality, Stingmon would be the more collected individual, meaning that it stays cool and calm even under pressure. So we basically have two Digimon, Exvimon and Stingmon, who clearly have their own characteristics, one being based on an insect and the other based on a dragon. and both are, personality-wise, quite in control of their actions. They know how to show restraint, and they know how to judge a situation and see what level of power and even what attack should best be used. Are we going to see these traits in their two DNA Digivolutions, meaning Paildramon and Dinobimon? Let us take a look. The first and more known fusion is Paildramon. It is one who has the power of a dragon and the defense of an insect. I admit that I had a hard time figuring out what they meant with the defense of an insect, as for many insects, their primary mode of defense would be escaping by running, flying, or playing dead. Anyway, when it comes to Paildramon, many of your comments referred to XVmon's traits taking the upper hand, which I certainly understand because 1. It is also a dragon Digimon, and 2. The Digimon is said to be capable of dying for its master, and this reminds me of XVmon and its strong sense of justice. I'm not saying that Stingmon would not want to die for its master, but I do feel that this strong desire to protect is better attributed to XVmon. Now, aside of Paildramon, we also have the other fusion called Dinobimon, who is surprisingly categorized as a mutant Digimon and not an insect Digimon like Stingmon. Of course, when looking at its appearance, we can say that its insect nature is more pronounced, but it remains hard to classify its species as either a dragon or an insect type. To be honest, my good friends, I went to do some research about mutant type Digimon, because to me it isn't that clear what they're all about. Unfortunately, not much is written about them. Well, maybe aside of an event in the Digimon Link's role-playing video game, where Volcanic Dramon mutated certain Digimon, changing their colors and making them gain less weaknesses, but this is in the game Digimon Links. I did remember one of my biology classes where we talked about actual, real mutations. A change in DNA sequence that can result from DNA copying mistakes made during cell division, exposure to radiation, exposure to chemicals, or infections by viruses. I'm going to spare you the image of a real mutant, not the one you see in X-Men. I'm talking of those poor people who were affected by radiation. Think of the victims of the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe. I would not recommend you to watch the pictures of the victims, even though I do have to say that whatever happened there should serve as an important lessons for our nuclear policies. Now back to Digimon. I noticed that some Digimon who are categorized as mutants were sometimes affected by something outside of their will, either making them normal or relatively unstable. For example, Argomons in training form is said to be attached to places where large volumes of data flow and consumes that data through the mouth on its underside. We have no idea what data is being absorbed. We do know, however, that Argomon is up to some sort of evil. Mud Frigimon is another example. It should normally be the icy Digimon Frigimon, who has a body covered in ice and snow crystals. Mud Frigimon, on the other hand, is mostly made of earth data. That is because it is said that it may be a mutant Digimon born from a mutation of Frigimon. What caused that mutation is unknown, but just like Frigimon, Mud Frigimon dislikes to fight, so that is an example of a mutant Digimon remaining the same when it comes to its personality. So, when it comes to mutation in Digimon, my theory is that some outside influences or outside forces is causing a Digimon's core, or you may call it DNA, to change, sometimes leaving it with the same personality or otherwise changing its personality into an evil one. By the way, the most evil among mutant Digimon might probably be Apocalypmon, who only ever appeared when negative thoughts were drawn together by darkness. Dinobimon, on the contrary to Paildramon, has a considerably ferocious personality and is very violent, especially when you take a look at its way of attacking foes. It chokes the life out of opponents or simply chops them, and with its compound eyes on its head, it can accurately perceive how it is causing misery. As I will show you in a moment, many would say that Dinobimon will manifest itself when Stingmon's traits are more powerful than XVmon. So let us now discuss your theories by trying to answer the following question: what makes a Stingmon and XVmon DNA digivolve into either Dinobimon or Paildramon? Devil Can Cry wrote the following: I feel like since it's a DNA evolution implying mixing of their data, the result will depend on the predominant amount. Just like in the human gestation, there is a mixture of the parents, there is also mutations. Maybe in this digivolution, these mutations, or tiny little errors are what end up defining the result. I did receive lots of similar and very elaborated comments like the one of Devil Can Cries. There is this general idea that the fusion we get will heavily depend on which Digimon is the more powerful. Now, this does make me wonder, what do you mean with being more powerful? Do you mean that because XVmon has more raw power than Stingmon that we will get a Paildramon? We did get an interesting answer to this question. Upward Vessel 880 wrote the following: Paildramon is if XVmon has more strength or data than the Stingmon it is fusing with. Same goes for Dynabimon, but instead it is Stingmon being stronger. From what I remember from the anime, Vmon had way more combat experience than Wormmon and is probably stronger, and that is why you see Paildramon in the anime. Now, I do have a few questions about this comment. Can we first of all confirm that Vmon had more experience than Wormmon? I remember quite well that we saw Stingmon first in episode 24 in the second season of Digimon. It suddenly appeared to help the Digidestined to face Thundermon. We don't really know how or when Wormmon first digivolved, and not knowing that is making it a bit difficult to measure whether XVmon really did acquire more data. Also, if I have to continue with the idea behind Upward Vessel's comment, I will have to assume that a Stingmon with more data in comparison to XVmon will make them DNA digivolve into Dynabimon. While I agree with this comment, because I also think as such, I do want to point out that Dynabimon is particularly interesting because I do think that something might have gone wrong. Let me explain. In appearance, both Dynabimon and Paildramon do look like they are diffused versions of a Stingmon and an XVmon, except that the traits of one of those two Digimon would somewhat be more visible. When you take a look at Paildramon, it is wearing the exoskeleton of Stingmon, making Stingmon more like armor. Paildramon has the X on its belly, which is partly visible because of the exoskeleton, and to finish, the Digimon does look more like a dragon than it does an insect. Those wings don't even look like they came from an insect to a Digimon. Dynabimon, on the other hand, really does look like an insect. You see it from its wings, the eyes. It clearly took more from Stingmon than it did from XVmon. I mean, it does have 6 limbs after all, and all insects have 6 legs. That is the reason why a spider is not an insect. I have to put the reference of the spider here because a friend of mine told me some time ago that spiders are not insects, and she was right, to my biggest surprise. So it really does appear that the traits of either a Stingmon or XVmon were more dominant. The problem, however, is that I believe that something happened in the process of a Dynabimon being created. Why do I say that? Paildramon is a dragon Digimon because XVmon is also a dragon. Stingmon is an insectoid Digimon, and Dynabimon does look 100% like an insect but is categorized as a mutation. I think that it normally should have been categorized as yet another insectoid Digimon based on the dominant Stingmon traits, right? Something probably happened in between that DNA digivolution process, because even if it appears that Dynabimon took more from Stingmon, it did not inherit Stingmon's cool and collected behavior like Paildramon did from XVmon when it comes to the sense of justice. And I did say early on that mutant Digimon either have the same behavior or become evil depending on what mutated them. And my theory is confirmed by some of you, like Texans Gregory, who wrote the following: Dynabimon is a mutant-type Digimon whose fusion may have gone wrong during the process, like the fusions in Dragon Ball Z when Goten and Trunks' fusion failed and they became an old man and a fat man. It's possible that Dynabimon messed up its DNA and can't digivolve into a Mega, nor can it be split up anymore. That is also a very interesting theory. The fusion having gone wrong might be one of the main causes of Dynabimon becoming so ferocious, but maybe it is not just that. Maybe it is more than just the presumed mutation that made Dynabimon become ill-willed. Eli Shawley wrote the following: The Digimon reference book entry repeatedly talks about how ferocious it is. I believe the Jargress, DNA evolution of this line, is potentially unstable without proper tamer to guide it, so the virus type takes over, similar to a Skullgreymon, a dark evolution. A very interesting point, and something I did not think about myself when I tried to figure out Dynabimon and Paildramon. XVmon belongs to the Nature Spirits family, the Wind Gardens family, the Dragon's Roar family, and the Metal Empire family. Stingmon, on the other hand, belongs to the Nature Spirits family, the Wingardium family, the Jungle Troopers family, and more importantly, the Nightmare Soldiers family. Members of this field are usually demonic Digimon or those who dwell in haunted areas. Without forgetting that Stingmon, among the other attributes it has, you can also find the Virus attribute. Those who are Virus Digimon tend to be violent with a thirst for power and domination, meaning that these quote-unquote evil genes and evil attributes in combination with a presumed mutation might have been the cause for Dinobemon becoming so violent. It could also be that our theory here is entirely wrong. That is the reason why I had to consult your comments, especially in the Digimon universe, as there is so much that can have an influence and affect the Digimon's development. Jack Faring wrote the following: in that way it reminds me of I'm going to say Digicross. I used to say DigiX-Ross. In that way, it reminds me of Digicross/Digifusion from Digimon Cross Wars Fusion, where one Digimon usually served as the core, while the other Digimon fused to it serves as weapons/armor with little to no say. Please note that Digicross and DNA evolution are not the same thing. In the case of this fusion, the dominant Digimon may depend on which is stronger and/or has more willpower. Interestingly though, if one compares their description, Paildramon has the power of a dragon and the defense of an insect. However, it looks more like a dragon than an insect, while Dinobemon is a chimera of a dragon and an insect. It is hard to classify its species as either a dragon type or an insect type, but its insect nature is more pronounced, implying that Dinobemon is the less stable form. This theory is certainly valid and had lots of supporters. It's just that I am assuming that because Paildramon is clearly a DNA Digivolution, that Dinobemon would also be another attempt at DNA Digivolving, but maybe gone a little wrong. What I'll do for those who are not aware of the difference between Digicross Fusion and DNA Digivolution is explain them. DNA Digivolution is a form allowing two or more Digimon to combine into a single Digimon. In some cases, the two original Digimon's consciousness join into one. Digicross, on the other hand, is a bit more complex. It involves multiple Digimon combining into stronger forms, but also involves attributes of mode changing, allowing the DigiX units, and DigiX units refers to the various Digimon that serve as components of a Digicross, to rearrange their data and become body parts or weapons for the new form. The Gestalt entity is usually controlled by the unit with the most powerful soul, meaning that for Dinobemon you will have Stingmon's soul being more powerful, hence it will be Stingmon's soul who would take control. It does make me a bit scared, I would say, because it kind of makes it seem as if Stingmon is this wild Digimon, and that would be the reason why Dinobemon is also very wild. But then again, when you look back at the attributes and the family Stingmon belongs to, it does make sense. I will show you a last comment I want to show before heading for the third part of the video. It is a comment that I found so scientific, I simply couldn't help myself, I had to show it. Golden Sun Adept wrote the following: it is the combination of mitosis and recessive DNA showing through. Take the evolution of Paildramon. Veemon or Davis were the ones to initiate the evolution. Notice that the dragon's roar is more dominant, much like human pigment, if two humans of different races produce a child. If the mother or father was of darker skin, their child will follow closer to that parent in terms of tone. That would leave Wormmon and the jungle species to complement the dominant trait. However, if Wormmon or Ken were to start the process, they will show more insect attributes, but they will be cloaked in heavy protection of the dragon's roar biology. It would give Dinobemon the appearance of a Goliath bee, but still have draconic features to keep it maintained for survival. Think of this as the recessive gene and DNA that show up in a child. Both parents may have brown eyes, yet their child may have blue eyes from one gene from other parents' lineage. Or different hair color. Natural blonde hair baby in a family of a natural black hair, or a red hair baby in a natural brunette family line. It's very interesting overall. A way they had showed what Gatomon and Aquilamon would have created had Gatomon took the main body. Same for Angemon and Ankylomon if Ankylomon was the main body. Absolutely. And let me add a comment of Marine Solar, who also had a very similar idea. She said the following: does that mean that the other DNA Digivolution have also a second form? That is, again, Digimon that only opens a lot of probabilities without giving us the other Digimon, because when one Digimon has a great fandom, you, of course, have to design a new form and ignore all other Digimon. Totally. You see, with Dino-Beamon and Paildramon as two different variants, could it mean that the other fusions would also have other variants? I would exclude Omnimon because that one has always been very special, and to me even quote-unquote the perfect fusion, as it combined the special qualities of the two bodies and can fully demonstrate them at any given situation. Not that the other fusions can't do that, it's just that I feel that Omnimon is a more 50-50 fusion without having a Wargreymon or a Metal Garurumon taking the more dominant position. But would we, for example, see another variant of a Shakumon who doesn't look at all like any of the components that made it? Or maybe would we see another variant of Sylphimon? If the developers don't give us an answer, I hope we can in the least count on some fan arts and discuss them. That would be very nice. And speaking of fan arts, I wanted to show a last comment. Andres Marrero wrote the following: "Since we are talking about Paildramon, I think this would be appropriate. I sent this to you, Nostalgia, some time ago, but I don't know if you ever received it. It would make an interesting video on its own." So what I received from our brother here, I received a link that led me to a page on Twitter. It showed a DNA digivolution between Agumon and Veemon and how it might look like. And I really have to say, it is very interesting because I've always been open to the idea of seeing the leader Digimon of the different seasons DNA digivolve. And here we see some examples, which by the way I would love to discuss with you guys in that other Digimon series we created, where we discuss fan arts of Digimon created by the community. Very interesting, so I really can't wait to work on that. Ahoy guys, this is the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope the video somewhat clarified the differences between Dino-Beamon and Paildramon. Marine Solar and Golden Sun Adept are really right when they say that we should normally also see the other variants. That would be fair treatment, to say the least. Are the developers really going to go as far? I don't know, and I think I said it before, my most favorite stories are those where all characters are given good treatment, where all characters get a sufficient amount of character development. So I hope they'll work on that. I'm also wondering, as Dino-Beamon was not given so much attention, I'm going to ask you guys, do you think that Dino-Beamon would also have its own Digivolution line, like Paildramon has with Imperialdramon and so on? Let me know, because I really think that Dino-Beamon shows a lot of potential like many other Digimon, but they are just left at the side unfortunately. So let me know in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, please, why not make sure to subscribe and to leave a like in the comment down below, huh? In case you are new, by the way, make sure to check the description box to see all the Digimon videos ordered properly. I like when things are clean for me and for you, and that way you can easily catch up on the newest and the oldest videos.